Welcome back to another episode of Rank 'em All, where we rank the full discography from different metal bands. And today we're going to take on Venom's full discography. Venom was of course the grandfathers of all things extreme. The black, thrash and death metal genres would perhaps never have happened if it wasn't for these guys. Venom hailed from Newcastle, England, and they were one of the most successful bands of the new wave of British heavy metal, even if they always stood out as a rather odd entity amongst other heavy metal bands of that wave. And we're only going to rank albums from Venom in this video, so no solo albums from Cronos or Mantas, and no Venom Inc. So if you're a Venom fan, then smash that like button and subscribe with the bell notifications turned on, so you won't miss out when I rank the discography of other metal bands. And now it's time to rank Venom's full discography, from the worst to the best. The worst Venom album is in my opinion their latest record, Storm the Gates. And in most cases I can find something that I like about their albums, but I really struggle just to get through Storm the Gates in one sitting, because this album is just ass. The production is bad, but not in a lo-fi welcome to hell kind of way, because this album has no charm at all. It kinda sounds like they put a wet blanket over the instruments before recording or something. Storm the Gates has no redeeming qualities, and it shouldn't even have been released at all in my opinion. It's albums like this that tarnishes a band's reputation. Maybe it's not as bad as Risk or Saint Anger, but it's easily Venom's worst album. And maybe the band should consider hiring a producer next time, because this one was produced by the band itself. And I really struggled to listen to the whole thing without tearing my ears off, so next. In 14th place we have Hell from 2008, and I can't say that I remember listening to this album when it came out. Maybe it's just that forgettable that I don't remember any of these songs. Anyhow, I catched up with this album in the last couple of weeks, but still this album goes into one ear and out of the other. But Straight to Hell is an alright song though, and there are some cool lead guitar work on this album. But the singing is kinda bad and the production likewise. Venom has really been struggling lately, because they are more or less only seen as a nostalgia act these days. But they keep putting out new records that unfortunately hasn't impressed me that much. But I guess that someone is buying them since they keep putting them out, so next. Oh, here we go. In 13th place we have the album that you put out when you're out of ideas and just want to pay homage to the album that the fans actually like. And you put out an album with a similar title, Metal Black instead of Black Metal, and you use a photoshopped variant of that iconic artwork from the 80s. Kinda like what King Diamond did with Abigail 2, but the only difference here is that Metal Black is a highly average album, and that is to put it kindly, so next. In 12th place we have From the Very Depths from 2015, and this album kicks off with the title track, and it's a rather powerful one. It's kinda like a thrashier Motorhead song, and it could have probably been a classic if it was recorded some 30 years earlier. Long-Haired Punks is like a crossover song, punkish and straightforward, and it's a rather catchy tune, and the Grinding Teeth is also somewhat alright. But the overall quality of the songs on this album is rather low, I would say. But at least it's not as bad as on Storm the Gates. And I remember that I thought that this album was alright when it came out, but upon revisiting it, I must say that it's decent at best. So, next. In 11th place we have Fallen Angels, and this is another one of those semi-decent releases from this once so trailblazing band. And this album is like a bottom-heavy and noisy thrash record. It has its moments like Pedal to the Metal or Lap of the Gods, and the Satanism has been toned down quite a bit on this album. Not completely, but it's not an all-out Satan fest either. And I haven't really listened to this album since it came out, and that's for a reason, because I think this album is highly average, so next. In 10th place we have Resurrection, which was the band's last studio album with their founding member and guitarist Jeff Mantas done. And the 2000s and beyond hasn't been an easy ride for the band. And even if this record is far from a masterpiece, it's one of the better Venom albums since Cronos returned to the band in 1995. Mantas' guitar play might have gotten some critique over the years, but with him in the band there's just a better dynamic to the songs. And ever since the band reunited, they've sounded a bit different. The heavy/speed metal of the early years has been replaced with a more dirty and bottom-heavy thrash sound. And if you're one of those guys that have only listened to the classic material and want to venture out further into Venom's discography, then Resurrection is a good starting point, even if it's hardly more than an alright album. So, next. In 9th place we have Cast in Stone from 1997, and this was the big comeback for Venom. For the first time since 1985's Possessed, the unholy trinity of Mantas, Abaddon and Cronos reunited to record a new album. Unfortunately, this lineup didn't last for that long, plus it didn't become the big comeback that the band hoped for, mainly because this album was released in 1997 and nobody cared about these guys back then. Did they manage to recreate the magic of their early records? Not really, but there are some cool songs on this album, like the Evil One for example. If that one would have been on one of those first 4 records with a similar production, then I think it could have been a classic, because it's a very catchy tune. And Raised in Hell and Flight of the Hydra are also rather cool tracks. The production of this album is a bit noisy, and I think that Cast in Stone is a pretty good album, and it's probably my favorite of the post-reunion era of Venom. And I just wish that they would have kept this lineup for a little longer. So, next. In 8th place we have Temples of Ice from 1991, and this album belongs to an era of Venom that people rarely talk about. I'm thinking of the late 80s and early 90s era of Venom, and the albums Primeval, Temples of Ice and The Wastelands. And during this time Cronos was out, and Tony Demolition Man Dolan had taken over the bass guitar and the vocal duties. And it's kind of an overlooked era of the band, mainly because Cronos wasn't in the band, and some fans skipped out on these albums simply because he was out. The Satanism was also toned down significantly during this period, so this was more or less a classic heavy metal album. And I like this period though, but maybe this album was a bit underproduced. Temples of Ice, Tribes and Fairy Tale are 3 songs that are worth checking out from this album. So, next. In 7th place we have Calm Before the Storm from 1987, and this was the first Venom album that didn't feature guitarist Mantas. And to replace him, Venom hired Jim Clare and Mike Hickey. But that wasn't the only change here. The satanic image was toned down quite a bit on this record, compared to their first 4 albums. It was with records like Calm Before the Storm that the band's status dropped, not only because of the slight change in direction and the constant lineup changes that followed, but Venom was no longer the most evil sounding metal band on the earth by 1987. Bands like Creator, Slayer, Possessed, Death and several others had surpassed Venom in terms of aggression and speed. So Venom ended up in a strange situation, and their popularity faded quickly. The Chanting of the Priests, Black Christmas, and Calm Before the Storm are amongst the more memorable tracks on this record. And in retrospect we can clearly see that Calm Before the Storm was a slight letdown, but it ain't as bad as some people make it out to be. But Mantas was definitely missed here, so next. In 6th place we have The Wastelands from 1992, and if you're talking about underrated Venom albums, this must be their most underrated album. It came out in 1992 when metal was dying and Venom's popularity had faded some 6 to 7 years prior to this. The band that recorded Welcome to Hell and black metal was more or less gone, but what we got instead wasn't that bad, even if this album was completely ignored at the time. And there's a lot of cool galloping riffs on this album, and there's almost this type of folkish or fantasy feel to this record. It reminds me a bit of the British thrasher Sabbath, but not as aggressive as them though. And just like Temples of Ice, there aren't really any black metal on this album, even if the song Shadow King has a cool chorus where the band chants Hell on Earth. It's a brilliant song by the way, and I also like Cursed, and if you like Venom and hasn't checked out this album yet, then I think it's time, because it's a rather strong Venom record in my opinion. Next. In 5th place we have Possessed from 1985, and this album was the end of an era, the end of the classic Venom with Mantas, Abaddon and Cronos, that managed to create an everlasting legacy with their first couple of records. And this album is gritty and noisy and the production is a bit thin, but their pummeling anti-melodic sound was infectious, even if this album wasn't as dark or sinister like those first couple of records. Power Drive, Satanicist, Fly Trap, there are some decent songs on this album, but the best song that they wrote during this time was called Nightmare, and it wasn't even on the album. Instead it was released as a single a few months later. While Possessed doesn't quite pack the punch of its predecessors, it's well worth investigating. Next. In 4th place we have Primeval from 1989, and this was the band's first album without frontman Cronos. And with their last 2 records, the band's popularity had faded quite a bit. And with Cronos out, things looked dire for Venom, but Mantas came back, and the band also recruited guitarist Al Barnes for the recording of this album. And Primeval was a great album and a triumphant return for Venom. But this album is still somewhat anonymous in their catalog, even if it's a great record. And the title track Primeval is one of the best songs that the band ever wrote. Parasite is also an up-tempo track that I do enjoy quite a bit. And I would place this album somewhere in between thrash, speed and heavy metal. In my opinion, this is the best album of the Tony Dolan era of the band, and even if it hasn't got the status of the first 3, it's still one of their best albums. So, next. In 3rd place we have At War with Satan from 1984, and this was back when Venom was on top of the world. I mean, Metallica was the opening act for Venom here, and I think that says it all. The very first track on the album is a 20-minute epic, and I don't think that anyone thought that Venom could pull off a 20-minute epic song, but they didn't just pull it off, they set a new standard with this beast of a track. It's 20 minutes long, but it never gets boring. Are you damned in hell? Come on, this is just great. And the rest of the album consists of shorter, more up-tempo songs. Rip Ride is an absolute classic as well, Stand Up and Be Counted and Women, Leather and Hell are also very strong tracks. And there are some cool speed metal riffing on this record, combined with those well-crafted lyrics and Cronos grunts of course. At War with Satan is an essential listen to anyone who is into the early days of speed, thrash and black metal. Next. In 2nd place we have the album that started it all, Welcome to Hell from 1981. And this is where all extreme metal has its roots, whether it's thrash, death, black or any other genre that followed. It all started with Welcome to Hell, and Venom took inspiration from Motorhead and infused some punkish speed, and they wrote some real dark and sinister lyrics that would have made Black Sabbath shiver in their boots. In 1981 and 1982, Venom was the heaviest and most evil sounding band on the planet, and I really do wonder what bands like Slayer, Exodus, Metallica, Creator, Sodom, Bathory, Celtic Frost, Destruction and those would have sounded like without Venom. Probably very different. And there are so many classic songs on this album that I hardly even know where to start. Welcome to Hell, Schizo, Poison, Live Like an Angel, Die Like a Devil, and In League with Satan to name a few. And a song like Angel Dust is practically a thrash metal song written some 2 years before Metallica and Slayer had their first albums out. And Welcome to Hell might be the most influential album of the 80s. It's definitely up there with Metallica's Kill 'Em All and Master of Puppets, and with Slayer's Rain in Blood or Iron Maiden's The Number of the Beast. This was an album that changed metal for the better, so next. And the number 1 Venom album is in my opinion Black Metal, the album that named the genre that was hijacked by those Norwegian bands in the late 80s and early 90s. By those standards, this album is more of a speed/heavy metal album, even if Venom was part of the first wave of black metal. And black metal is my number 1, simply because it was as influential as Welcome to Hell that came out some 11 months prior to this. But it's also a more complete album in my opinion. There are less filler tracks on this record. And I think that songs like Black Metal, Countess Bathory and Don't Burn the Witch set a new standard in metal. Black Metal is one of the most important albums of all time, and I think it's Venom's absolute best album as well. So, let's have a look at my full list now. And I see Venom's discography as a discography in 4 parts. We have the early days with Mantas, Abaddon and Cronos for the first 4 records, and this was the band at their peak. And then we have the Demolition Man era with Primeval, Temples of Ice and the Wastelands. And Calm Before the Storm was the album that bridged those 2 eras. And then we have the comeback era of the band when Cronos, Mantas and Abaddon got back together with the albums Cast in Stone and Resurrection, even though Resurrection featured another drummer. And we also have the 4th era of the band, which is when Cronos made the band his own and the Mantas and Abaddon was out of the lineup. And this is 2006 Metal Black and forward. And outside the classic era of the band, I do think that the Tony Dolan years are very underrated. The comeback era is also worth checking out, but some of their more recent albums are of a varied quality in my opinion. And I also urge you guys to check out all the side projects like Cronos, Mantas, Empire of Evil and Venom Inc. And now I'm curious to hear about your opinions. What's your favorite Venom album? Welcome to Hell, Black Metal, At War with Satan or any other album? Let me know your favorites down below. And feel free to rank their full discography if you're familiar with it. And if you enjoyed this video, then smash that like button, that really helps the spread of my videos, and in the long run the growth and existence of my channel. And don't forget to subscribe with the bell notifications turned on, so you won't miss out when I rank the discography from some other metal bands. And if you want to go the extra mile to support my work, then you can become a patron like these fine gentlemen. Or go and grab yourself some merch at the Ruthless metal store. It's all linked down below. And let me know whose discography I should rank next. And until next time, thanks for watching and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye bye.